Jack never expected to wake up to the sight of a middle-aged woman standing in his backyard, holding a clipboard like she was conducting a military inspection. It was 7:30 in the morning, the sun had barely risen, and there she was, examining his fence with the intensity of a forensic scientist at a crime scene. Jack rubbed his eyes, convinced he was still half dreaming, but no, there she was, squinting at the wood panels and muttering to herself like she was solving the mystery of the century. His coffee wasn't even brewed yet, and already the day had taken a bizarre turn. He stormed outside, barefoot, his t-shirt barely covering his confusion. "Excuse me, what exactly are you doing?" he asked, his voice still groggy from sleep. The woman, without flinching, turned to face him, eyes filled with self-importance. "Good morning. I'm Miss Thompson, head of the HOA committee," she announced, as if he should be honored by her presence. "I'm just doing a routine inspection. This fence, well, it's not quite up to neighborhood standards." Jack blinked, trying to process the absurdity of what he was hearing. He took a slow look at his fence. Solid, sturdy, completely fine. "I'm not even part of the HOA," he said, crossing his arms. Miss Thompson's face twitched ever so slightly, but she didn't back down. "Your property is adjacent to HOA land, which means your aesthetic choices impact the overall value of our community. We like to maintain a uniform look." Jack exhaled sharply. "So what exactly is wrong with my fence?" She tilted her head, pretending to analyze the structure like an art critic. "For one, the color is a little off. It should be a deep brown, not this faded shade of tan. And it's exactly 1.5 inches taller than it should be. Did you get HOA approval before you built it?" Jack let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Why would I need HOA approval when I'm not in the HOA?" Miss Thompson gave him a sympathetic yet patronizing smile, the kind one might offer a child who just asked if clouds are made of cotton candy. "Oh, Jack," she said, as if they were old friends. "You may not be an official member, but as part of the neighborhood, it's important to be cooperative." Jack was still groggy, but now he was also angry. "Cooperative? You're trespassing on my property at the crack of dawn to measure my fence with your little clipboard. That doesn't sound like cooperation. That sounds like harassment." Miss Thompson gasped as if he had just insulted her entire bloodline. "I am only trying to keep the neighborhood looking presentable. There's no need for hostility. But if you insist on being difficult, I'm afraid I'll have to report this to the committee." Jack couldn't help but laugh again. "Go ahead. Report it to whoever you want. Just stay off my property." She gave him a tight smile and walked away, but not before taking one last dramatic look at his fence like it personally offended her. Jack thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Over the next week, Ms. Thompson made it her personal mission to monitor his yard as if she were a park ranger protecting an endangered species. He caught glimpses of her peering through his bushes, pacing along the property line, and even setting up what looked suspiciously like a camera disguised as a bird feeder. Then came the official notice. A crisp white envelope was left in his mailbox, adorned with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal letter stating that his fence violated neighborhood regulations, along with a demand for immediate modifications. The letter was signed by Miss Thompson herself, along with an ominous warning that failure to comply could result in further actions. Jack was baffled. He wasn't part of the HOA, and yet, here they were, treating him like he had broken some sacred law. He decided to ignore it. That was a mistake. A few days later, he came home to find Miss Thompson standing in his yard again. This time, with a tape measure, diligently measuring his grass length. Jack's patience snapped. "That's it. Get out of my yard." Miss Thompson barely looked up. "Did you know your grass is precisely 1/2 inch taller than the HOA guidelines allow?" she said, as if that was a crime worthy of exile. Jack took a deep breath, rubbing his temples. "I don't care about the HOA guidelines. I am not an HOA." She pursed her lips. "That's unfortunate, Jack. Because I'm afraid the committee has already voted, and if you don't comply, we'll be forced to take legal action. Jack stared at her, stunned. Legal action? Over my grass. Ms. Thompson nodded. And the fence. And the overall atmosphere of your property. It's simply not in line with the community's aesthetic. Jack had had enough. It was clear that logic wouldn't work on this woman. If she wanted to play games, he was going to play right back. But he wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to reason. He was going to give her exactly what she deserved. That night, Jack got to work. He printed a large, bold sign and hammered it into the ground right by the fence. It read, in all caps, "Beware of lion." The next morning, Miss Thompson returned, clipboard in hand, ready to issue another complaint. But the moment she saw the sign, she froze. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, Jack saw something on her face that he hadn't seen before. Doubt. She took a step back, glancing around as if expecting a wild animal to leap out from the bushes. "Jack, what is this?" Jack sipped his coffee and shrugged. "Oh, just a friendly warning." Miss Thompson swallowed hard, looking at the sign, then at Jack. You don't actually have a lion, do you?" Jack didn't answer. He simply let the silence stretch, watching as Miss Thompson's paranoia took hold. Finally, she turned on her heel and hurried away. Jack smirked. This was going to be fun. Word of the lion sign spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Jack had barely finished his morning coffee when he saw his next-door neighbor, Mr. Willis, peering over the fence with a look of sheer terror. "Jack, buddy, just checking in," he said, forcing a nervous chuckle. "Saw your sign. Didn't hear anything about, new pets." Jack, still enjoying the chaos he had created, took a slow sip of his coffee and gave a nonchalant shrug. "You know how it is, Willis. Gotta keep the place secure." Mr. Willis gulped and backed away, muttering something about checking his home insurance policy. Jack didn't confirm or deny anything, and that was the best part. Let them wonder. Let them imagine. By the afternoon, the neighborhood was in full-blown speculation mode. 2 doors down, an elderly woman whispered to her friend about the wild beast lurking behind Jack's fence. A group of kids rode their bikes extra fast past his property, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Even the mailman hesitated before slipping letters into the mailbox, as if expecting a paw to swipe out and snatch him. Jack couldn't have asked for a better result. But the real masterpiece came when Miss Thompson returned. She showed up at precisely 2 p.m., clipboard in hand, as expected. But this time, her usually smug expression was replaced with unease. She stood at the edge of the yard, fidgeting slightly, eyes darting toward the bushes. Jack watched from his porch, amused. "Jack," she called out, voice tight. "We need to talk." Jack walked over casually, arms crossed, wearing his best poker face. "Something wrong?" Miss Thompson cleared her throat, forcing herself to look composed. "I received multiple complaints from concerned residents. There are rumors that you have a—" she hesitated, as if saying it out loud would summon a lion from thin air. "That you have a wild animal on your property." Jack raised an eyebrow. "A wild animal? Now, that's an interesting rumor." Miss Thompson narrowed her eyes. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Jack. This is serious. If you actually have an exotic animal, it would be in violation of countless zoning laws and safety regulations, not to mention the HOA guidelines on proper pet ownership." Jack took another sip of his coffee and let the silence drag just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. "Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I'm not in the HOA. So even if I did have something, let's say, unique, it wouldn't really be any of your concern, would it?" Miss Thompson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Jack, don't play games. If this is some kind of joke, it's gone far enough. You need to take that sign down immediately." Jack tilted his head, pretending to consider it. But what if I actually do have a lion? Wouldn't want to mislead people, now, would I?" That did it. Miss Thompson's face paled ever so slightly. For the first time since their ridiculous feud began, she didn't have a quick-witted response. Instead, she took a small step back, glancing at the bushes as if expecting a pair of glowing eyes to emerge. Jack held back a grin. "Of course, you're welcome to come in and take a look for yourself," he added. Miss Thompson's jaw tightened. She hesitated. Then, in the most uncharacteristic move Jack had ever seen, she stepped backward again. "That won't be necessary," she said stiffly. "But I will be reporting this to the committee. Expect an official notice soon." Jack watched her hurry away, her usual arrogance dimmed by something new, genuine uncertainty. That evening, Jack took things a step further. He installed a small Bluetooth speaker near the fence, tucked neatly behind the bushes. With a little effort, he found an app that played realistic animal sounds, including deep, guttural growls. It was a small touch, but an effective one. The next morning, Miss Thompson returned with backup. This time, she had 3 other HOA members in tow, 2 men in polo shirts and a woman clutching a folder like it was a sacred text. They stood by the fence, whispering among themselves before Miss Thompson stepped forward. "Jack," she called, her voice trying to sound authoritative but cracking slightly. "We need full access to your yard for an inspection. Immediately." Jack leaned against the porch railing. "Now, why would I allow that?" One of the men, who Jack recognized as Mr. Langley, puffed out his chest. "We have reason to believe you are harboring a dangerous animal." Jack gave a slow, amused nod. "So, let me get this straight. You, a group of HOA board members, think I have a lion, and your grand plan is to walk into my yard unarmed and demand to see it? That's your strategy." The woman with the folder looked suddenly unsure. She shifted slightly, glancing at Miss Thompson. "Well, when you put it like that." Miss Thompson shot her a glare before turning back to Jack. "Enough of this nonsense. Either you allow us access or we escalate this matter legally." Jack sighed dramatically. "Fine. Go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you." He pulled out his phone and, with a tap, activated the speaker. A deep, reverberating growl filled the air, low and menacing, like something massive was lurking just beyond the fence. The reaction was immediate. The woman with the folder let out a tiny shriek and took a full step back. One of the men muttered a curse under his breath. Even Miss Thompson, despite her bravado, visibly tensed. Then, Jack cranked the volume higher. A second, longer growl rumbled through the yard. Mr. Langley turned on his heel and walked away without another word. The woman followed. The second man hesitated for half a second before rushing after them. Miss Thompson, however, stayed. She looked furious, but for the first time, there was something else mixed into her expression. Was it fear? "You are going to regret this," she hissed. "You think this is funny? You think this is a game?" Jack shrugged. "A little." She clenched her fists and stormed off. Jack grinned. That night, he sat on his porch, watching as neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. People were talking. The rumor mill was churning at full speed. He overheard hushed conversations, words like dangerous, illegal, and lion being thrown around. Someone even suggested calling animal control. Perfect. Jack leaned back in his chair, taking a long sip of his drink. Miss Thompson wanted a battle. He was more than happy to give her one. By the next morning, Jack knew he had won the first round. The neighborhood was buzzing with paranoia. People were too afraid to even walk their dogs near his yard. One guy even started jogging on the opposite side of the street, glancing nervously toward Jack's property like a hungry lion might leap over the fence at any second. It was the best entertainment Jack had had in years. But he also knew Miss Thompson wouldn't give up that easily. She wasn't the kind of person who let things slide. Sure enough, before noon, a white van rolled up to his house, and out stepped 2 uniformed officers from Animal Control. Jack sat back in his chair, sipping his coffee, watching as they approached with a mix of determination and discomfort. One of them, a tall, lanky guy with a notepad, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received a report about an exotic animal being housed on your property. Specifically, a lion." Jack took another slow sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch. "A lion, huh?" he finally said. "That's a serious accusation." The second officer, a woman with short blonde hair, gave him a skeptical look. "Do you have an exotic animal in your backyard, sir?" Jack sighed, standing up. "Well, I'd hate for you to waste your time. You're welcome to take a look." The officers exchanged glances, clearly expecting some kind of elaborate cover-up. Jack led them to the backyard, stepping aside so they could get a full view. He watched as their eyes scanned every inch, taking in the perfectly normal, completely lion-free yard. The only living creature back there was his fat, orange cat, Mr. Whiskers, who was currently sprawled out in a patch of sunlight, looking utterly unimpressed with the whole situation. The lanky officer blinked. Sir. This appears to be a regular house cat." Jack nodded solemnly. "Yep." The blonde officer frowned. "Then what's with the sign?" Jack shrugged. "Security measure. You'd be surprised how effective it's been." The two officers exchanged another glance. They clearly knew they had been sent on a wild goose chase, but they also couldn't exactly arrest him for putting up a fake sign. The blonde officer sighed and pulled out a form. "All right, sir. Since there's no actual exotic animal here, there's no violation. But we do need to document that this was a false report." Jack grinned. "Oh, I'd love that. I bet I can even tell you who made the report." The officers, now visibly annoyed, didn't argue. They handed him a copy of the report and left, shaking their heads. Jack watched them drive off before turning toward Miss Thompson's house across the street. Sure enough, she was standing at her window, peering through the blinds, her expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. Jack held up the paper and waved. Later that afternoon, Jack decided to do some research. If Miss Thompson wanted to drag him into HOA nonsense, he figured it was only fair that he dug into her history as well. A few clicks on the county website led him to some interesting discoveries. It turned out the HOA had been collecting fines from non-HOA residents under the pretense of neighborhood compliance. The same bogus charges Miss Thompson had tried to slap on him had been used on others before. Some people had even paid them, assuming they were legitimate. Jack didn't just sit on this information. He printed out copies, attached them to a strongly worded letter, and sent them directly to the county office, the local news, and every single homeowner who had ever received one of those fake fines. He also may have slipped an extra copy under Miss Thompson's door, just for good measure. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the next week, an official investigation was launched into the HOA's finances. A few of the committee members started jumping ship, claiming they had no idea Miss Thompson had been misusing funds. The neighborhood was in an uproar. People who had previously been terrified of the HOA were suddenly demanding answers. Miss Thompson, of course, tried to do damage control. She called for an emergency HOA meeting, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But when she showed up, she was met with a mob of angry residents who had finally had enough. Someone even had a printout of Jack's fake fine, waving it in the air as they shouted about fraud. Jack, of course, attended the meeting with a big bucket of popcorn. As things spiraled out of control, Miss Thompson tried one last desperate move. She stood at the front of the room, hands raised, voice shaking with forced authority. "Everyone, please, let's remain calm. This is a simple case of miscommunication. I have only ever had the best interests of this neighborhood at heart." Jack took that as his cue. He stood up, holding the copy of the animal control report. "Oh yeah? Then what's this?" "A false report made to authorities because you didn't like my yard." The room turned silent. All eyes shifted to Miss Thompson, who suddenly looked a lot less sure of herself. Someone in the crowd muttered, "She wasted city resources?" Another person said, "Wait, she did what?" Jack smirked. "You know, I hear filing false complaints is actually a serious offense. Maybe I should report that too." Miss Thompson stammered for a response, but she had nothing. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. By the end of the meeting, it was official. Miss Thompson was being removed from her position. The HOA was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. Refunds were being issued to those who had been scammed, and the neighborhood suddenly found itself free from the iron grip of its former dictator. Jack celebrated in the only way that felt right. The next morning, he put up a new sign in his yard. This one read, in big bold letters, "Beware of karma." Miss Thompson moved out within the month. The house sat empty for a long time, as if the neighborhood itself was trying to recover from her reign. Jack, on the other hand, finally got to enjoy his home in peace. No more bogus fines. No more unwanted inspections. No more nonsense. And best of all, his lion sign still stood proudly by the fence. Because, in the end, it had done exactly what it was supposed to do.